All right, let's do this. For company, Cut Your Teeth, Part 4. My name's Kellen. Thank you so much for stopping by. So we're going to finish this series here today. And things that probably will notice in this episode is as we get closer here to 2010, which is where this series will stop, two things kind of become apparent. One is the resurgence of 90s death metal is in full force by the end of this time period, this decade, and you'll start to sort of notice that and creep in. Let me turn that up here. And other thing is format. Vinyl is on its way back. So in terms of popularity, after that period of the 2000s when it wasn't much of a thing, and vinyl starts to creep back in popularity, and that actually for the first time, as in this series, shows up. So we left off in 2008, so we're going to pick it up there. And in the background here, I have a record for you. This one was actually easier to find on vinyl than it was on CD, but this is, I'll take it out of this is Beyond Mortal Dreams with From Hell. I think in here we get kind of a glimpse. It was self-released back in 2008. This band is from Australia, Adelaide, I believe, and that kind of fire, Satan, demon-looking thing is the image from the self-released CD from 2008. But this is their lone full-length. Prior to this, they had some, demos. It kind of culminates in this release, and it's been reissued here by Nuclear Winter Records. This is just on black, so nothing too special to show you. But what they sound like, so the Nile comparison is impossible to avoid, but it's not because of the Egyptian thing. Just the super low, sort of cryptopsy inspired vocals, but more than anything, it's that guitar tone, that like muted guitar tone that lends itself to an incredibly broad stage, right? Like, it's interesting in the world of audio. There's these terms like soundstage and forward presentation, and often like you'll find like a record or a speaker or so on and so forth that doesn't have a great forward presentation, meaning it's you don't hear a lot of the dynamics, right? And I think that's something that a band like Nile and in here, Beyond Mortal Dreams sort of sacrifices because of that sort of muted guitar tone. But what they're going for is like an incredibly broad sort of stage, right? Like the XY axis that all this noise is coming from is difficult to decipher, but one thing you do know is that it's super big. It just lends itself to that kind of scale on a record and as a sound, as a band. It worked really well for Nile, and it gave them the sense of atmosphere that Beyond Mortal Dreams shares. Now the subject matter here is a bit more straightforward, death metal, songs about hell and Satan and so forth. But when I first heard this band, it just immediately, that signature guitar tone was instantly recognizable. There was no mistaking it. And there's not many bands that do that sound, with this level of, like on a parallel or equal scale, and still kind of have their own sound. Turn it up there a little bit. Anyway, that'll be playing in the background. And that'll get us, started here today. This is, in their, because it is their lone full length. What's interesting about it is it feels like the culmination of a career. They dissolve after this, but the songwriting here, there's like an 11-minute track. The Agony Ever After, there's an instrumental track. Things that you typically wouldn't find from a band early in their career. This feels much more thought out, patient, practiced, professional in some way, like a musician later on in their career would have the know-how and the confidence to execute a bit more diverse ideas onto a full length. Super cool. I don't think it's that this LP is not that difficult to find. Nuclear Winter's records it kind of made it readily available. I don't know how many people know this band. Australia has a tremendous death metal scene, but this one kind of slipped through the cracks. So definitely check that out. If you're a Nile fan, this is a must for you. Just because it shares so many of the similar characteristics that are often difficult to find from other death metal bands. And they do it incredibly well. So Beyond Mortal Dreams, From Hell, 2008, initially self-release here, but on Nuclear Winter on LP. Okay. So this is Necroblast Beam, Destination Null Part. Really interesting album artwork here. It's like a French landscape, like a vista, and then there's sort of this monolithic black, hole that reaches into a different dimension or something. So this is 2008, and off the top of my head, let me get the correct record label here for you. No, I'll just put it in the comments. Oh, this is on Agonia, I'm sorry. Agonia Records. So another French death metal band here. Interesting, so I would classify this as technical death metal. It has a lot of great sort of stop and start song dynamics to it, but it doesn't always lend itself under the sort of thrash metal to death metal kind of riffing song structure, which makes it feel at times a bit alien. I don't even know if there's like part of like I don't know if it's a hardcore sort of influence for the band, but it's simplistic and doesn't have that same kind of like palm muting history to it, right? Like you can sort of trace that from thrash metal to death metal, and this band sort of challenges that. And when I was listening to it, it initially kind of caught my ear because it just felt like very different than a lot of the bands that we're listening to from this era and from death metal in general. But to call it, I think, avant-garde would probably be going too far. But those kind of dramatic shifts in song dynamics between like something a bit more mid-paced and sort of without that palm muting structure, then to something groovy, then to something incredibly fast with sort of a blast beat pushing the velocity. A cool little, record here that also I have not seen a lot of people talk about. And kind of, there's not a lot of comparisons here. There's a part of me that even feels like fans who are not death metal fans would be interested in this. Like in 2008, this would have been a good sort of pairing from, let's say, you were coming from that like a metalcore, like I don't know, even like the Meshuggah or something like that. If you were listening to something like that back in the mid-2000s, like you'd picked up Meshuggah's Nothing, and you liked that kind of like mathematical and technical approach, but you wanted something a bit more death metal, this was absolutely really going to speak to you. And they changed their style, later in the career. For Necroblast Beam, they sort of moved into like a death black sort of sound that had a bit more atmospheric emphasis. This here is definitely a bit more about precision in terms of its riff structure than it is like a broader sense of atmosphere. But strange song titles that definitely fit a bit more like numerical song titles. Sorry for Us, 6 equals question mark, like things like that, right? It doesn't fit a lot of the familiar sort of themes and tropes that you find within death metal, especially, from any generation, I should say. So, an interesting sort of, that'll probably sort of stand alone out of the selection that we're looking at today, but, once again, a creative death metal band that, probably fits in someone's sort of niche in terms of description or why they would pull it off the shelf, because they want something very unique. Once again, I wouldn't necessarily call it avant-garde death metal, and it's not like black death metal, but a different kind of sound, one that it serves this era incredibly well, and probably for a lot of people who are getting into death metal, especially back in 2008, was a great sort of segue band on Agonia Records. So that is, one more time, Necroblast Beam, Destination Newell, or Newell Park, I should say. All right. So we moved from 2008 here to 2009. Okay. 2 more. So 2 more, I should say, from Central and South America. I guess that's it to say. So not Central, but Denial from Latin America. It's probably a better way to phrase that. Denial. Now Simon talked about this, so I was hesitant to bring it up and include it here. If you've seen the video, that you're gonna know what I have to say about it to some extent, because when Simon talked about it, he did a great job describing just the enormity of this sound. It's somewhere in between, I think, and it's on, so this was on Asphyxia recordings. I'm sorry, Asphyxiate recordings. I think Blood Harvest has reissued it on LP, and I should definitely grab that. It's just a very interesting vocal approach too. The vocalist here is in a bunch of different bands within Mexico. So he's in a doom metal band. He's in true death metal bands, also like a black death band. So that kind of vocal range lends itself to a different kind of tone here that you wouldn't get, and they're kind of you wouldn't get traditionally from a death metal band. There's a few times when I'm listening to this record, I kind of like look sideways, like what is the style of vocal going for right now? Because it is so different. But being from Mexico, I mean, you think about, I think the drummer was in Cenotaph and Shub-Niggurath, and this is far closer to me with Shub-Niggurath in terms of sound. It has got that like heat pouring off of it. So while the initial sort of like Scandinavian, like Swedish or Finnish death metal weight is all over this, I think there is some different sort of contribution in terms of like the textural analysis of this, right? It feels hot. It feels, in that sense, like typical within the, like a Shub-Niggurath or even like Brazilian or Peruvian, Chilean death metal. It's closer in line in terms of that kind of sound from the guitar tone that it's too simplistic to call it, like a Swedish death metal record. Anyway, I'll kind of be a little bit shorter about this one because Simon did touch on it, and I was really trying to avoid duplicating his picks, but a monstrous record. Please check this one out. So Catacombs of the Grotesque, Denial, 2009. This is Vome Potro, I believe that is the correct pronunciation, and the album is entitled Liturgy of Dissection. This is a Severed Records release, so brutal death metal for sure. It has very much like a brutal death metal vocal sound to it. So if you're looking to New York at the end of the 90s, that super low sort of tone, you're going to find it here. However, the riff structure does not share the same kind of dynamic push and pull that the New York scene does. It has a bit more of like ladder Cannibal Corpse groove, and I would even say like Morbid Angel in terms of the kind of precision. So it shares like a very different kind of American death metal songwriting style and riff structure. But pull out this here. There are two things that I think are exceptional about it in terms of a brutal death metal. I mean, outside of the fact that it's not as predictable, it doesn't share much of that sort of like slam emphasis. it's almost antithetical to the things that we were talking about with Beyond Mortal Dreams. It's very much like the guitar tone is up in your face. It's clean, it's sharp. It doesn't sound like uninspired or stale, right? Like that production element. But it just has an incredible amount of edge to it. And in that sense, it's a really cool listen when you think about that kind of precision. And it combined with, the Cannibal Corpse groove and the Morbid Angel, like those influences operating within a brutal death metal, like the vocals come in and like it's only a brutal death metal record. It's really unique, and this is out of Brazil, very different, than any of the Brazilian albums we've talked about from this decade. Much less, or I would say to a greater extent than what most people think of Brazilian death metal. The solo work, oh my goodness! So it almost like I had to stop this record a few times and just like pour over the fact that this is like a solo. I want to say that lasts. I forget which song it is. Let me see if I can pull it up here. I think it's Hor Humanu Factor. I don't know if I got the name perfectly right there, but I want to say on that song, it's track number 7. It closes with like 2 minutes of soloing. I may be slightly exaggerating there, but it's the point where like I stopped listening to the record and just went back and replayed it and tried to find where the solo began, because I couldn't. It kept on going, and I was completely caught off guard in the sense that like this is a brutal death metal record. That's not something you hear on a brutal death metal record. Like it's not something you hear on an Internal Bleeding record, right? That's not something you hear on a Devourment record. So it is another highlight for this release. I guess I'm still sort of surprised, thinking about it, but really cool. They have a release prior to this. I want to say from 2005, 2006. I think it's around that time period. I may have missed the date specifically, but anyway, that one is very, it's the same as the brutal death metal record. I think this one, the songwriting's a little bit better, but if you like, that New York scene, probably the first record is going to be speaking to you a little bit more. If you want something a little bit more like in the vein that I've talked about, here, pick this up. It's not often that you come across this kind of a brutal death metal record from Brazil, and it's totally unique when I think about comparing to the other bands from this series. So that is Ome Potro, Liturgy of Dissection, 2009, Severed Records. Vinyl here. Just one of those. It was easier to find this on vinyl than it was on CD. So this is Vasilith. I believe this was originally put out on, I could be wrong, I believe this was originally put out on Profound Lore. Here it's been reissued by $20 spin. But man, if there's one album that points to the sound, like where things were going, that I'm going to be talking about today. I mean, it's hard to talk about this without talking about incantation, right? To some degree, this is very much like incantation worship. And there were a good amount of bands that were doing that at this time period. Like, I think of, Father Befouled is another one that comes to mind. Grave Miasma. But what's interesting is in the same way that those bands to me sound very different than the other kind of sound that I think incantation was also ushering in the sense that the more atmospheric death metal bands that started to appear at this time, like Abyssal and Antediluvian and Mitochondrian, equally I think were inspired by incantation. And the reason I bring that up is I remember I did a video when Marty and Alan did I think they had Mike Seatown on, and they did like a best albums from 2010 to 2020. I did a response video, and then I mentioned an Evangelist record that I had. And I had a member of Evangelist reach out to me and say that they were aware of, had some nice things to say, but more importantly, we're talking about how their release, and they're very much playing in that like Mitochondrian, Antediluvian sound, right? They were inspired, or they heard Vasilith, and in that sense, like this album walks both those lines, right? So between something like Dead Congregation and Evangelist. Now, it doesn't have like the same kind of like death industrial sound that Evangelist has, and it's not nearly, I think, as riff-driven as something like Dead Congregation. It's denser and has that sort of like claustrophobic production style that became all the rage, especially in the years to come, where you see more and more bands sort of exploring that. It's in that sense, it sits right in between the two of them. You can say, like, as now, a decade plus later, it would be a great place if you're trying to get into either, like this year, you saw releases by Drawn and Quartered, and you saw a release by Portal. And those bands sit, on opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of, who I think, like, inspired from incantation kind of bands. I think most people don't even recognize or wouldn't identify Portal as such, but I still would sort of put my money down, and I say that neither one of those bands exist without incantation. So anyway, that's kind of a good place to introduce a band like Vasilith. So Cryptborn and Tethered to Ruin, I believe is the title here. I think the members have gone on to play in other current active, like Black Curse, for example. I think the drummer here plays in Black Curse, but anyway, Vasilith, a great sort of place to end this well, not completely end, but like on the last episode, good one to choose. Okay. Devos, Gospel of Maggots. This is on Unique Leader Records, and technical death metal from Poland. Absolutely ferocious technical death metal. That being said, probably what I love most about this record is how enjoyable it is to listen to. I guess what I mean by that is like the experience for this record isn't cerebral. Like you listen to, you know, a band like Necrophagist, for example, and it's a different kind of listening experience, right? And I don't think you have to be like a proficient musician to enjoy them, but it is very much, you know, a kind of sound that requires a degree of engagement that for me was never like as fun as some other death metal records. I liked listening to technical death metal. If you've been paying attention to this series, you can tell that I'm in technical death metal, but there are some qualifications or limitations to that. And what Devos does is they take, maybe it's probably difficult to talk about Polish death metal in general without a broader sort of analysis and engagement with the role that Vader played here, you know, and has been playing for the decades now that they've been active in terms of contributing some kind of identity to the Polish death metal sound. So and they're very much, you know, Vader, when you think about them, they're kind of like death thrash, right? So Devos takes that, and I would even say, in the same way that you could enjoy listening to a Malevolent Creation or a Sepultura record, they've tapped into that kind of death thrash. It's if you take that, and that is like the chassis for this vehicle, but you take out like that muscular sort of V8 engine that was driving that brand of death thrash that, you know, those bands, those, you know, Vader, Sepultura, Malevolent Creation. If you removed that engine and you put in some like nuclear powered V12, that's what Devos would sound like. It is so much more intense. The drumming performance is astonishing. Maybe if you want to know like my tastes in technical death metal drumming at its best, you'll find it on Gospel of Maggots. The first record, this is their second LP. The first record, the drummer, he does. What I'm trying to say is there's like a wood block here or a cowbell that he's hitting, and it just must have been because he was so bored on the first record beating up the drum kit that he wanted to add something else in just to make it more entertaining. But the drumming performance here, I mean, there's plenty of, you know, technical death metal drumming is not short on talented musicians, right? But this style is exactly what I want. I would go so far to say I chase this record on an annual basis. Like, I'm waiting for a modern, technical, brutal death metal band to play in this style. Just because of how much I enjoy listening to it. It's so difficult to find anyone who sort of walks the line for me between those two subgenres, and the way that this does, while at the same time having that, like, you know, you have that desire to pull it off the shelf over and over and over because of how much you enjoy listening to it. That's rare to find in technical death metal, especially one of this brutality. So, you know, by the end, this is about, I looked to see how long it lasted. I mean, its entirety is 33 minutes long. And by the end, you feel like that chassis that I talked about, you know, is spent. Like, you know, and even as a listening experience, like, I don't need any more than those 33 minutes. You know, the engine block essentially is, you know, falling apart. The chassis is contorted. Basically, the vehicle has started to melt after the 33 minutes of being driven in such an intense velocity. And that's what, you know, Gospel of Maggots is for me. I wanted to hold this record into the last, you know, that I talked about here because of how much I really love it. Probably competes, you know, if you were to say, like, favorite, you know, death metal records, period, you know, more specifically, like, I hold it, you know, in the same vein as I would, like, Pierce from Within. Like, it competes for that kind of, while they sound totally different, they're from different eras, they're separated by 15 years. That, like, echelon, for me personally, of death metal, this record belongs in that discussion for me personally. I love them equally, and you know, if there's one that I'm going to recommend that you have to check out from this episode, go check out Devos, Gospel of Maggots, 2010, Unique Leader Records. You can probably get this from Unique Leader on CD right now for, like, I don't know, probably less than $10. So once again, probably not that hard to find, but you're not going to find anything that touches it. You can listen, you know, they've been active, and I think they're still putting out material, but I don't need anything for them past their first two records, their first two full lengths, I should say. But Gospel of Maggots is them at their peak, and that's all I got for you. So this is going to close out this series. Thank you so much for watching. This has been a lot of fun, but it was also the most exhaustive thing I've done for the channel. So for everyone who watched and commented and offered up suggestions, you know, please, if you know, this is your first time watching the channel and the first time tuning into this series, there are 3 other episodes that chronicle death metal starting at 2000 up until the end of the decade in 2010. So you got 3 other episodes to check out if you're interested in the subject. If you know, go through the videos and you have some suggestions that I didn't pick up and you want to, you know, throw them my way, please leave them in the comments. Any kind of feedback, memories that you have from this decade. I kind of started it as a passion project, because I thought it was a part of a forgotten era in death metal when the genre wasn't cool. And in that sense, I feel like it needs a bit more attention and proper context. Many people, you know, who've reached out and said, like, I really don't know a lot about this decade of death metal. So thank you for doing this, and that's meant the world to me. Anyway, that's all I got for you. We're gonna let this series go. I'm gonna talk about something other than death metal for a little bit. Yeah, cut your teeth, part 4, in the books. Nail in the coffin, we're done. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys later. Bye.